If you are one of the probably quite a few people who are now playing Forza Horizon 5 for the first time, maybe you've come over from this channel on Gran Turismo already and started playing Forza Horizon 5, you're just getting into it as of, yesterday I think was the wide release on the PlayStation. These are 5 more tips, tricks and pieces of advice, if you will, for those new players, and some of these I'm hoping will encourage you to think outside of the box, because that's kind of the name of the game, especially in comparison to Gran Turismo. It's a very different flavour of car enjoyment, if you will. So point number 1 is maybe a bit of a controversial one, but it's about AI difficulty. When you first jump into a game, especially Forza, where you have lots of rewards for increasing the difficulty on a race, turn off traction control, turn off the driving line, turn up the AI difficulty, etc, etc, I would actually recommend the one thing that you don't bother doing is making the AI difficulty really high, because even though it is appealing to earn more cash from doing that, in my experience it's not really worth the aggro because of rubber banding. You will have rubber banding in Horizon 5 no matter what, even if you have it on the lowest setting, and the amount of cash that you gain versus the amount of enjoyment, which I believe it saps from the game having the difficulty really high, just isn't really worth the trade-off. So my advice would be go for something like amateur or novice, so you get a bit of a bonus, and then just rely on the rest of the inherent aspects of the game to earn extra cash. Trust me, you don't need to be giving yourself that kind of annoyance unless you really do want the challenge. If you're just looking to earn cash though and just complete the races without pulling your hair out at the rubber banding etc of the AI, you just don't really need to set it too high. For certain events you have to do it anyway, for certain seasonal events in particular you have to race against, unbeatable AI, but generally speaking you just don't really need to annoy yourself by doing that. The second thing is kind of counterintuitive to what I do a lot of the time here on the channel. Of course, I'm known mostly in the Forza circle and the Forza sphere as far as tuning for top-end speed builds. Of course, they are more than that technically. They're about grip, handling, acceleration, and top speed all together. But I'm actually going to give you the advice of not bothering to tune cars, which I shouldn't be saying because it will probably mean you won't watch many of my tune setups, but those are for people who just do want that absolute performance for online racing, racing with friends, whatever. And don't get me wrong, tuning cars definitely has its place, and for certain things you will need to do so. However, what I mean by don't bother tuning cars is that when you first get into the game, that's the crucial thing. I would encourage you to drive as many cars as possible in their standard state, because once you modify a lot of vehicles, and I've touched on this point before in the dangers of Gran Turismo having stuff like motor swaps and fitting the same engines in multiple different cars, the Forza problem is that if you swap everything to four-wheel drive and put a twin-turbo Lambo engine, it kind of feels like road trip adventure, wherein the vehicles can ultimately feel like body swaps of the same essential thing underneath, and of course that becomes a bit boring. So if you do, early on in the game in particular, really enjoy those aspects of driving each car in its pure form, it will be a lot easier for a Gran Turismo player to get into without thinking this is an absolute joke of ridiculous performance from every single car, but it also means that you'll save yourself even more cash at the start of the game, so that then when you actually do need to modify something, you've got a lot more to play with. The third thing is one which has always been a bit of a trick of mine. You can do this, I believe, in pretty much every Forza Horizon game that I can recall, and I'm sure some of you do this already, but this is in particular geared toward those of us who, like myself, are pretty lazy when it comes to the gearbox and just use automatic. If you do use a manual box in the game, this won't apply to you at all, but for those auto users such as myself, this does, because you can kind of trick the game into giving you sort of a semi-automatic mode, and in particular this is when you're having a big jump. If you take a huge jump in the game and then just, redline the car, when you land, you'll still be in the same gear that you left the jump on. The problem is, you won't now be going as fast. So let's say, for example, you've got a 7 or 8 speed supercar, you take a massive jump, you take the jump at 200 miles an hour, but then when you crash land, you're going to drop so much speed that you're still in 7th gear, and the car's going to go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 down to the gear that it needs to be in, and then you're losing precious time. And particularly in online events against real people, you don't want to waste that time. My advice is, and this little trick, is you can trick the game into thinking that the car has already landed by pressing the e-brake, or the handbrake, as we call it here in the UK. If, as you'll probably see me doing here in some gameplay, you still accelerate, but hold that e-brake, you'll notice that the car will drop a couple of gears, depending on the kind of shallowness, if you will, of the drop. And what that does is, it puts the car in the gear you already need to be in for when you do land. It's a very small trick, but a very effective one. The fourth bit of advice will save you a huge amount of time, and you can thank me for this one later. One of the main things in the game is, of course, taking photos of cars, and there are an awful awful lot of them to do. Around 900, in fact, if you include all of the vehicles in the game. I have kind of a two-stage bit of advice for this one. Advice piece number one is the key piece, and that is when you're racing against the AI in story mode, immediately press photo mode as soon as the race begins, especially at the start of the game. Drive as many different cars as you can so that you get as many different kind of opponents as you can. If you take a photo at the start of pretty much every race, which is what I've done for, this replay of the game, if you will, I've already photographed over 300 cars despite not searching for them in free roam at all. And that's all from just immediately pausing the game in camera mode and just photographing the whole grid. Sometimes you can get 10, 12 new cars that you haven't photographed before all at once. It saves so much time, and of course you can work through them so quickly, and every time you work up through a new level, you get more and more accolade points. The second thing, and this is another little bit of a small secret, it's obvious when you think about it, don't overlook certain vehicles which you don't think would have a photo mode application. So for example, in certain missions, you'll have a tow truck, for example, with a car on the back. That still counts for a photo. The traffic vehicles also count. So think outside the box. And finally, point number 5, well, to bring it back around and tie it all up in a bow, it is exactly that. Think outside the box, and I'm going to show you a prime example of what I'm talking about, especially for Gran Turismo players where it's all this serious and professional approach of track day racing, and even the dirt racing is very set on this one particular track and there's no deviation. It's very self-serious, the real driving simulator. In Forza Horizon more specifically, throw that away. You have to realign your thinking and think outside the box. Here, for example, you'll see me attempting a speed trap in a Koenigsegg. Now, I remember from my previous gameplay that this one was a pain in the backside to do, because when you hit the water splash, even in something as quick as a 1300 horsepower motor swapped CCX, you drop so much speed that hitting that required 135 miles an hour to get the maximum 3 stars is just a right pain. So think outside the box. Don't do what the game presents as the obvious thing to do. Instead of that, go up the hill, turn around, fly through the trees, take a jump, and then approach that speed in a totally different way, mid-air, instead of going through the water. This is just a tiny example of what I'm talking about. The game presents you with a lot of circumstances like this where there's an obvious approach to do something, but then sometimes that obvious approach seems maybe a little bit more difficult than it should be. Maybe a certain time that you have to hit in a race which just doesn't seem feasible. Or maybe try cutting a corner, going off-road. And in certain events that will work, in certain events it won't. But think outside the box, especially if you've never played Horizon before, or maybe TDU and these other free roaming maps. Thinking outside of the box really does make all of the difference. I'm not saying that you need a genius level IQ and have to approach every single thing in the game in this way, but don't be afraid to think differently to get things done. That's it though for my 5 additional bits of advice as you start out on your Forza Horizon journey. I hope you're enjoying the game. I've certainly been enjoying starting from scratch again, and it's kind of cool that a lot of the stuff is carried over from the Xbox version. So technically my previous records are carried over, although I still have to do that stuff again. The tune setups, which is really cool, are all carried over, so I've got like hundreds of thousands of credits coming in every day from just the Xbox version, which is a nice perk, and various other advantages as well. So for those who are coming back from the Xbox into the PlayStation, I hope like I am you're enjoying yourself, and I really would love to hear if you've never played this before and you're just getting into it, what do you think of it so far? I've already had messages about really positive thoughts from people that you're loving this, so yeah, that's good to see, and I'll see you with more Forza Horizon 5 content in future. But for now, thanks for watching.